everybody, and welcome to G&G Live Show, Gurpreet and Gil. So today we have an interesting topic, something Gil and I have been discussing, and I think it's well worth having this open discussion around managers and why they never get feedback as to how they are performing as a manager and their management style. So as always, we're going to kick it off with Gil's insights on this matter. So Gil?
I didn't understand that.
Sorry.
You really threw me off there.
Hey, Bixie didn't understand that.
So there's a lot of factors that go into the answer.
Yeah.
Why managers don't get feedback. For me, probably the biggest, broadest factor would be psychological safety. That they don't create the environment in which their direct reports have that safety to talk about it. Now, don't get me wrong. It's really hard to come by because your manager holds your job. Yeah. That's in their powers. They hold your job. And it being the fact that we're all humans, it makes it difficult, very difficult to just say to your manager, you know what, these are the problems with your managing. Yeah. But it only becomes a possibility with psychological safety. Because if somebody comes to you thinking that, you know, there can be repercussions for what I'm about to say, they're not going to say it. They're not going to be comfortable saying it because they're going to protect their own job. They're going to protect their own role. Yeah. Because that's more important to them than sharing that information. So that's just the first point on that. What do you want to say on that?
I agree with you. As we were discussing offline about this, I think a couple of weeks ago, how many people are not comfortable to go to HR or anybody in the organization to give feedback on a manager's maybe mistreating them, misbehaving, or just whatever the case is, in sole sake that they're going to lose their job. And I know a couple of personal incidents of people in my life that's happened to them, and one of them was HR, and she didn't give feedback until her exit interview. And then the HR said to her, and she's also HR, like, why didn't you not come forward? And she said, if I came forward and said, you know, he was a senior level HR person that she reported into, and if I openly came to you and said, like, these are the things he's doing and all these issues, you would have not taken me seriously, or he would have found a way to get rid of me. And that has happened so many times to so many people that if they did voice a concern about the manager got rid of them. And that's like a bad cycle, and that we continues to keep having in organizations where we say to people, employees, hey, voice your concerns and all that stuff. But when they voice their concern about a manager, the first thing a manager does is see ya.
Yeah, and they squash that safety. That's the thing, is they squash that safety. So you can say all you want that I have an open door policy, but when a person comes through that door and you rake them over the coals for making a mistake, or you yell at them, or you belittle them, or you dismiss them, they're not coming back. And other people are going to know that. It's also a risk often with the manager because people don't want to be outed. Even if you go to HR, well, HR is either going to have to say, hey, there's my general idea of what's happening, or as Ruth just added, from her experience, HR would usually support the manager. They'd side with the manager and say, oh, you need to change your behavior. I know not you, Gurpreet. I know not you. But that is, and I appreciate that Ruth brought that up, because that is the common experience. That is why HR doesn't get love or respect or appreciation or anything of that in many, many places, because that is the way that the organization behaves, in turn the HR behaves. And so that instead of seeing it as the manager being the problem, they see it as the employee being the problem.
It could also be, just to give a little background, it may seem like HR is supporting the manager. This goes back to the topic we covered last week, how much power HR has. it could just be that you're not seeing the full picture and HR is not supporting the manager. Maybe they like, I'm just going to give myself an example. I would have that candid talk with the manager. Hey, somebody brought this concern to me. Let's talk about it and get their side of the story, and then give them pointers on how to manage their team and all that stuff. But all fairness to HR, we still have to have a united front with the managers in the company. So even if we don't agree with the manager's decision, this goes back to how much power HR has. Again, the topic we covered last week is that we truly don't have so much power when, like, about managers. If a manager decides that, no, I don't want to listen to you, what can HR do? This has happened.
What can they do in most places, or what should they be able to do? Because that's the thing. That's part of the problem. And going to the second aspect of that is, what is sorry. Can you repeat what you just said? Because I'm trying to capture my wording on this.
So I was saying it goes back to the topic we covered last week about how much power HR has in this situation.
Oh, yes. So exactly. So then in HR, in many situations, is powerless against a manager who's getting a lot of complaints. They're powerless against a manager, especially if that manager is getting the results. If the manager is getting those KPIs that they're being measured for, then that manager in many, many situations has carte blanche to behave however they want. In many situations, in a lot of places that I've worked with, we've helped include behaviors into the performance management process in ensuring that there are right behaviors of how to behave as a manager. And it's not just about getting those results, but it's also about how you treat people. So going back to that topic, the power that HR is given in most places is minimal to deal with a manager who's getting results but behaving badly. However, when done right, when given clarity around what is the right behavior, and HR needs to support in the creation of this, then they can say, hey, look, it's great that you're getting the results, but you're also driving all of your people crazy. And by the way, you have higher turnover than anywhere else in the any other department. So, so what power HR has and what power HR could have are often two very different things.
I agree. I think in HR's situation, I think it goes back to how strong of an HR person you are and how strategic you are too. Like in all the incidents in my career, I've been able to voice those concerns with the manager. And if the turnover, that's a great indication for that department. Hey, by the way, do you know you have X amount of turnover? And here's the reasons, especially if you have the exit interviews. I know there's a whole, should you do exit interviews or not? And in some cases, exit interviews do shed a lot of light. But then it goes back to, how willing are managers to be able to, can they be coachable? Right? And now a manager, you can get a feedback. Now, talking about the feedback, and I'm going to connect the dots a little bit here. If companies are open to taking the feedback, it also comes down to employees, to the point where, this is why I don't like doing surveys, employee surveys, employees think those are a joke if they're not seeing any come out of it, right? So let's take this feedback, for example. If you do feedback on managers and then the employees don't see anything come out of it, they're not really going to start giving proper feedback. They're just going to give a basic feedback. Now, if you want feedback, then you have to put steps into how you're going to correct this behavior, take the feedback information, what you're going to do with it. And then it goes back to, like in my experience, I would sit down with the manager and say, here's your feedback that I've gotten. And I'm not going to disclose names because that just becomes a whole different mess. And if the manager is willing, in some cases, managers are willing to, first they didn't even know they had a bad feedback, and then they're willing to learn and change and coach, and then you can put them on a coaching program. Sometimes what happens is managers is just promoted into management level positions without any proper training. So I think it also comes down to how coachable are the managers.
Well, you make a great point, actually, because part of the problems is that a lot of the times people see the impact that a bad manager has. But I read a survey or a study a couple of years ago that 58% of people in management positions were given no training and have no training in how to be a manager. And that is a really, really important point, because a lot of times what happens is the person gets promoted into their first management position because they're a really good individual contributor. So therefore, they're put into a management position, yet given no tools to deal with it, no tools in understanding that being a manager and being an individual contributor require a completely separate set of skills. Organizing a team and leading a team is completely different than sitting down and doing the task itself. But we don't upskill people for that. We don't train people for that. And then we wonder why they have no idea how to provide feedback. We wonder why they are disengaging people. We wonder why they don't know how to manage change within their team, because they weren't given the training to do it. Right? And what kind of job, what kind of what kind of role doesn't require some sort of learning to be able to do that role? Manager is no different. It's even more complex because you're dealing with humans and motivation and psychology that is really, I mean, unique person to person.
And also, as managers, as you pointed out, you're dealing with so many things, but you're also dealing with human beings, and each human being's needs and wants are different. So being able to juggle the different personalities on your team and know how to work with each individual. You can't just have, I think a lot of times managers have this system where they do one system and kind of like, okay, fits all for their team, without realizing that, no, you can't have that one fit system. There's no such thing as one fit system. You have to be able to pivot to fit each individual, because each individual's needs are different. Each individual's growth and training and learning curves, everything is different, because we are human beings in the end of the day. And I agree with you. A lot of times people are put in roles without being properly trained, and not even providing training.
And go to your point, though, about how they treat each person the same, I find with a lot of young managers, one of the reasons for that is the advice people are given. They're not given training, but they're given a lot of advice. And one piece of advice that a lot of new managers are given is you have to find your style. You have to find your way of doing things, which I do agree and appreciate. However, the problem is that they are given that high level, Hallmark card kind of advice without understanding that what that means is your style also has to integrate with other people's style. That you have to understand that you might have a style that's comfortable for you, but as a manager, you also have a responsibility to your team to adjust to their style. And to understand that if you force everybody into your way of doing things, then they're not going to respond necessarily the way you want. One person might want feedback. You bring them into your office or into your Zoom call. You give them direct feedback. You tell them exactly what the issue is and you move on. One person might need to take 5 minutes to talk about how your day is going. But if you treat them both the exact same way, because my style is I'm direct, you're not going to get the results that you want. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of feedback, because this is something that I've worked with a wide variety of companies on, is around 360 feedback.
Okay.
Because 360 feedback can be a very valuable way for managers to learn about their performance. The problem is that most 360 feedback doesn't necessarily, or ties to the wrong things. It will tie to performance management. It will tie to bonuses. It will tie to raises, etc. And when that happens, it doesn't work, because what happens is that people know somebody else's livelihood is contingent on this feedback.
Yep.
And they end up gaming the system. And I've seen it many, many times. And I've come into many, many companies after they've had that kind of 360 feedback, had people burned by it because it didn't teach them anything. Whereas if the feedback is used purely for that person's development and growth, and the feedback providers understand that, it can be very valuable information. But in most scenarios, it's not used that way.
I want to add on to earlier what you were talking about, and then you started talking about 360. A lot of times managers, we're, this whole employee engagement, and we're like, it's like a buzzword, and people buy into this, and then managers start doing is like, team lunches and all that stuff. While you were talking, this thing kept popping into my head. I remember this one organization where it was the managers. It wasn't really the managers, but it's a small organization, but it was more of the senior level people, the owners of the company, that were kind of toxic. And I remember a few employees saying, we don't care about these lunches that they keep like every month have, or these dinners and all these extra activities and stuff, when they treat us like crap. And I was like, you know what? That is such a good point. You can't treat people or your employees, and managers do this. You can't be treating your employees like crap weekly basis, and then once a month throw them out. Okay, team party, let's go for a lunch. Oh, employee appreciation. They're not gonna value that when you've been like belittling them, yelling at them. And I think a lot of people don't understand that part. You don't have to give even like a team lunch if you actually recognize someone for what they're doing at the time they're doing it. It could be a simple, hey, good job, I appreciate you. But the way you treat somebody. And I think a lot of managers miss out on that. And some young managers go into power tripping as well, because they're new, they became a manager at a young age and so on. But I think let's go back to the topic of, how would a manager benefit from having feedback? If we actually started putting these systems together where we do allow to openly have a system in place where companies do put this into play, to where employees anonymously can be done, where they can give feedback, and then HR can share this information with the manager saying, hey, this is your feedback, without any names given. How would that benefit to the manager?
On a very, very high level, it's how does feedback benefit anybody? And so the reality is one of the favorite facts I learned about psychology back when I was in university is that without feedback, there is no learning.
Yeah.
And the example they used was a study where they asked people to draw a line that they thought was an inch long. For our Canadian viewers, that's 2.5 centimeters. So the person was supposed to draw a line that was an inch long. And people who were never given any feedback, it was completely random, and they kept on drawing line after line. Whereas when people were told it's too long, it's too short, they eventually got closer to it. If you're just doing the same thing over and over again, and you're not told what you're doing that's beneficial or not beneficial, that you're just going to continue to make the same mistakes because you don't know it's a problem. One of the reasons why homework, for example, is difficult, it is a problem for little kids, is that you do a math problem at 7 o'clock at night, you get it wrong, and you don't find out for 14 hours that it was actually wrong. So it actually internalizes in your brain as correct. You're not getting any negative feedback. So no news is good news. And so if people are continuing and they think, okay, everything's fine, they're never going to improve. Nobody is perfect. I've never met a perfect human being. As Lily says, feedback is a must for everybody. As my grandfather always used to tell me, the only people who don't make mistakes are 6 feet under the ground. And the rest of us do make mistakes. The rest of us are if you're above 6 feet under the ground and you're not making mistakes, then you're not doing anything. You're not trying anything. Exactly. And so as a leader, we need to have this growth mindset of, I'm not perfect. I'm always trying to get better. I'm always doing the best with what I have. And then if I am taught, you know what, when I speak to a person a certain way, it stops them from being productive. When I dangle opportunities in front of a person and never give them to them, it demotivates them, right? If you actually understand that, because a lot of times managers think the things they're doing are motivating. They think, oh, I'm putting you on a PIP to motivate you. Oh, I'm changing your comp plan to motivate you, right? But the real outcome might be very different than what the managers believe.
By the way, if you change comp plans on employees, that can be considered constructive dismissal.
That's a whole different story. But the whole thing is that these managers think they're doing something that's creating motivation, and without feedback, they're going to continue to think that that's motivating. And if it's not motivating, the fault is in the employee, not in you. That's what they end up believing, because they're not told otherwise. They think, oh, that employee didn't act well, that's on them. And as Lily says, managers are not God, that they don't need feedback. They definitely do. I've never met a person at work who didn't have some sort of feedback that they would benefit from. Managers are certainly not different.
I agree. Everyone can benefit from feedback, especially managers, because you're managing people. Wouldn't you want to know what's working and what's not working for your team, or for each individual on your team? And also, I think a lot of times when you were talking, I kept remembering this scenario with a client company that I was one time assisting. When you belittle people, and now this person wasn't doing it all the time, but still, like, he was a great person, great boss and all that stuff. But then he had this thing in him where he'll just start yelling at you in front of everybody. And it got to the point where one employee was crying. And then it just got to the point where some of them just didn't felt motivated anymore to do the work or go above and beyond, to help. And it all came down to, like, yes, he can be great at times, but he's also a bully at times. And giving feedback to managers who have these split personalities is great, but at the same time, it goes back to how willing are they. Again, no one can change overnight, right? You have to be willing to want to change for helping your team. And in the end of the day, if you can change to your behavior and you can uplift your team, I believe in uplifting. I mean, by all means, I'm not perfect either. I'm not a perfect manager, boss. I'm not perfect either. There's days where, no doubt, sometimes you just like, then you gotta step away and like, I need a 5-minute break. Come back and I'll talk to you. No one's perfect, but the thing is, you have to be able to have those open communications with your team. You have to be willing to take the feedback. And the managers, I agree with you, managers can benefit, but I think the key here is if the manager wants to benefit. So, it all comes down to learning how willing are we as managers and bosses willing to take the feedback and change, because we can only take the feedback if we're willing to change. Absolutely. That's the only way the feedback will work.
Otherwise, there'll be less like you were saying before. You say it once. If they don't even try to listen, you're not likely to say it again.
No,
absolutely. I want to follow up on a point that you were talking about the monthly parties or whatever. One of the things that drives me crazy, it's one of my pet peeves, is that at a certain point in time, people started to believe that culture was company events. Culture was, parties or a foosball table or any of the thing. I guess I have
on Zoom.
What? Yes, exactly.
On Zoom.
And I've said it many, many times. Culture is not what you're doing outside of work. Culture is what you're doing when you're working. The way people are treated. And that's why, as we get close to summing up here, that is why this is so important. Because employees perceive their manager's behavior as the culture of the organization. Their manager's behavior represents the organization. There are other aspects that go into it, but in an outsized way, the manager's behavior represents what the organization is. My manager gives me opportunity. It's a company culture that has opportunity. My manager belittles me. It's a company culture that allows my manager to belittle me.
Yep.
And these are the things that culture, what's happening actually during work. When it's happening, are you given the chance? Are you given clarity? Are you given the resources? Are you given autonomy and inclusion and all of these things? That is what culture is. That is what managers have a huge role in creating within the organization. And unless we create mechanisms with which that they can actually receive feedback, because one of the problems in many organizations is, like we were talking about before, HR isn't going to be able to do much. And then the person who's actually evaluating their performance is their manager. Well, most employees aren't really comfortable going to their step up manager to complain about their own manager. It's just not part of the system. It's just not part of what people do. And I understand it, and no disrespect to anybody who's not willing to do it. I get it. And I wouldn't do it myself, because it's such an uncomfortable situation. But that's who is exclusively evaluating a person's performance, and they only have a sliver of light into what's actually happening.
You brought up 2 great points. The funny thing was, I actually had that point in my head before we went live, and then I lost it, was culture. Like, managers are the ones who build the culture. It's manager, right? Culture is also departmental culture that then builds the whole culture. So great point on that, managers will set the tone for the culture. And second point, just going back to that HR thing, I'm going to give a perfect example of why HR doesn't really have much power. There was one manager that I voiced so many times that they need to go. Just needed to go. Really bad behavior. Really, I don't want to list all the bad behavior, but you name it, this person probably did it. Just needed to go. And kept telling the CEO, so it's a small organization, that you're paying them X amount of money, but what's your return? But you have all these issues with this person, can't manage people, dating their own employee, like, just you name it, this person's done it. But no, for some reason, the CEO just never let them go. Never, till this day, probably still there. No clue why.
Reflect so badly on them. That's a thing, is they think it's a performance issue around that one individual. So the CEO keeps that person around. It could even be well-intentioned that they want to help them grow or whatever it is. There's a lot of different reasons why managers keep bad employees around. But one of the things that I found is their problem is that they're focusing on the employee, not on the fallout from that employee being there. So it's one thing to have a bad person in their
employees so that they don't report to him, but that wasn't really solving the problem. The problem was still there. And this person wasn't even getting the company results. So it was just, again, the person's been there so long. I think the owner felt like, the CEO felt like they had some loyalty and all that stuff. And some companies, smaller organizations, get into this whole loyalty thing. This person's been with me for 10 years from the start. So again, like, HR can only, again, we can't make senior levels make decisions. We could keep voicing the concerns and shed some light on it, but true power just comes down to their bosses and again, it comes down to a lot of like, well, if this person's getting me results, well, employees can suck it up, or what are the cases. Going back and just summarizing our points, feedback is great if managers are willing to accept the feedback and for the greater good, as they want to professionally develop themselves as managers. And at the same time, I think as we sum it up, it's actually a greater benefit. I would love to get feedback on me as a manager. And then you have to take feedback. You also have to be willing to receive it with an open mind and process and sleep on it. And then come back to your team and communicate a plan, or get your team together and say, let's change things. What do you propose?
Yeah.
Your ending remarks, Gil?
No, that sums it up really well. I guess one thing I would also add is in terms of feedback, just because you read Radical Candor doesn't mean you're capable of implementing it. It's a wonderful book. It has amazing ideas, but when implemented poorly can really go wrong. But yeah, I thought that was a great summary, Gurpreet. This is really, really important topic for managers and for companies in general, because managers are really the heartbeat of employee experience. They really create that so much of a role in that for people. And if we can help them get better through feedback, then everybody's experience will be better.
Also, you don't lose great talent, right? A lot of companies, which we didn't even touch on, was that you're losing great talent if you're a bad manager, which I don't think any company wants to afford losing is great talent. So on this note, we're going to end this segment today. We'll be back next Wednesday with another great HR or / employee experience topic, which will announce maybe in a few days or close to our segment. So this segment, G&G, takes place every Wednesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So follow us. If you have a topic you want us to cover, please feel free to reach out to Gil or myself anytime on LinkedIn. Until then, we'll see you guys next week. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.